Good afternoon, everyone. Caresoft Technology would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow webinar. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over just a few housekeeping items. The audio portion of this webinar can be heard through your computer speakers, or if you prefer, you can listen through your phone using the dial-in option displayed on your screen. Please note all lines have been muted to reduce any kind of background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A pod on the left-hand side of your screen, and we will do our best to answer at the end of the presentation or follow up with you all offline. This webinar is being recorded and a copy will be emailed to you. Just to tell you a little bit about Caresoft, we are a trusted government IT solutions provider delivering software and support solutions to federal, state, and local government agencies, as well as education and healthcare. Caresoft maintains dedicated teams to support sales and marketing for all of its vendors, including ServiceNow, Google, F5 Networks, and Adobe. Our contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to email us or give us a call. At this time, I would like to introduce you our speakers for today. We have John and Reggie both with ServiceNow. They will be doing your presentation, and guys, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Brooke, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining this call where we will be covering a very valuable topic in 21st century IT, which is how to build and drive value from your configuration management database. Let's take a look at the agenda, where we'll talk more specifically about creating value. We will talk about some of the differences regarding ServiceNow's configuration management database, which we call Service Aware. And then we'll talk about best practices for a healthy CMDB. Next. So today's digital transformation is well underway, and it's raising expectations about how fast IT departments can move. Traditional configuration management databases are typically unable to keep pace with the rate of change as cloud-based solutions and new ways of working, such as DevOps, are adopted. At ServiceNow, the commonalities we see across the government sector is that all agencies are in various stages of IT modernization, cloud migration, IT asset management, and of course advancing their cybersecurity initiatives. At the core of all of these projects and missions is a need for a single source of truth, which is the configuration management database, generally referred to as the CMDB. The CMDB is a purpose-built database for configuration management, and the importance of the CMDB cannot be overstated because it's really the most comprehensive, accurate inventory of all IT assets, as well as business services, applications, and their dependencies. As mentioned earlier with ServiceNow, we refer to our CMDB as Service Aware because it gives you insight into all of your IT infrastructure configuration items and their dependencies. So on an IT operations level, the CMDB is both tactical and strategic. The value of a CMDB delivers but is really not limited to three really important aspects that impact every IT organization. One is gaining visibility into the health of your IT operations estate across both on-premise and cloud infrastructure. Two is asset management, both software and hardware. A service-aware CMDB helps customers prepare for vendor audits and comply with mandates like FTARA and the Megabyte Act. And then number three is change management, and again, these are just three basic examples. So when you look at the current slide in a world where everything is changing, I'm sure that in these interesting times everyone can relate to that heading. Today, operations challenges are compounded by keeping employees productive from their home offices and ensuring they have what they need from an IT support perspective. We know that operation teams are working around the clock to keep their services secure, running, and cost effective. Next. So the configuration management database is truly the foundation for IT. This is where the CMDB helps you get enterprise-wide visibility into all of your IT domains, both on-prem and within the cloud. So your infrastructure inventory, including physical infrastructure configuration, those configuration items that support business services, the running processes, virtual machine software, and their dependencies. And this helps increase your predictive capabilities to maintain business continuity and the health of your business services. The outcomes derived are ongoing, effective change management, and health of the physical IT estate. Also, the ability to discover across your operations estate on-prem and in the cloud helps IT make decisions in near real time. And ServiceNow's agentless discovery is the engine that keeps the ServiceNow configuration management database near real time. The other solution is service mapping, and service mapping is also used to populate the configuration management database. And these automated topology maps deliver a really fast time to value for IT to identify all configuration items supporting business services and mission-critical apps. Next. As we all know, digital services can really slow things down significantly. Services can be slow and fail without ever knowing it, and this happens often because technology and data live in silos. Individual silos can look green while users experience frustration with performance. Agencies spend a lot of money on best-of-breed tools to manage specific environments. For instance, there are tools to discover and manage Windows servers, tools to manage cloud, tools to manage networks, and now with 21st century IT, there are tools to discover microservices and containers, including Kubernetes. So each one of these tools have their own repositories and management consoles. Does this cause an issue? Absolutely. This translates into lack of visibility into the relationship between business services and cloud resources. Each cloud becomes its own siloed technology stack that has to be managed separately. And there's no way to manage resources in a business service context across on-prem and cloud. Also, there's no visibility into issues or changes or ability to ensure changes go as planned across your IT estate. So this ultimately breaks the incident and problem management process. So if you are currently using or plan to use an ITIL framework, it's going to be pretty challenging without an accurate and complete CMDB. And therefore, that goal for all IT departments should be to address a CMDB. Next. So how does CMDB help? What's the value of having a configuration management database? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's both tactical and strategic because it helps IT teams answer critically important questions like, what is the impact of a service issue or outage to the business service and mission? How are you prioritizing vulnerability patching schedules between IT and security? For DevOps teams, how are you managing traceability required to deliver quality code as efficiently as possible? And for the cloud migration team, how are you identifying and tracking wasted cloud resources and or software licenses? Next.
So Reggie, that brings us to our first poll question. Brooke, I hope you have that handy. We wanted to ask everybody, how many CMDB or other hardware and software management systems are you working with in your environment today?
Awesome. Looks like we're seeing a majority with 1 to 3.
Oh, that's good news. The reason that we bring the question up, and I apologize, everyone, this is John Insco. Good morning and thanks for joining us. The reason that we bring this up is simply that many of our customers across all federal organizations are dealing with all of the considerations that Reggie talked about a moment ago. Silos of organizations with different tools that were never designed to talk to each other, that don't allow organizations to have visibility into all of the items in the IT estate across on-premises deployments, cloud deployments, and even those that are in the same buildings. So the first slide that I wanted to show is what's called our capability map. And in the red rectangle here, we see 12 different products that represent the depth and breadth of the ServiceNow platform. Most folks are familiar with us as an IT service management or help desk type software, and you might even know about our IT operations management capability, but there's so much more that the Now platform delivers, and it's all based upon a single data model and single database called Configuration Management Database. Things like IT asset management for software and hardware devices is critically important, especially around software licensing costs. One of the things that our IT asset management product does is allow you to know if software is in use and whether you need to prepare for additional licensing costs in the future. We don't want surprises, and when it comes to limited budgets, we certainly can't afford to. Next is enterprise DevOps. We want to be able to do change automation, insights, and one-click audits. Security operations, integrated risk management and governance tasks, IT business management, and HR service delivery, just to name a few. Imagine the power, insight, and control that you would have across these different silos of information-based organizations with a single CMDB. With regard to IT service management, most people are familiar with things like incidents, changes, and problems, but it goes a bit deeper into release and request management, service portfolio, and vendor management. And for IT operations management, which is my specialty, there's actually 3 tiers within the product. Visibility delivers discovery from scanning devices on your network to find out who's out there and what they're doing, and then turns that into what we call a service map, which Reggie spoke about a moment ago. And a service map is a visual representation of all the configuration items that we've captured in your CMDB as it relates to the business or mission critical service that they provide. So at a glance, you can see which devices are providing that business application, and if there's any degraded or failed performance, you can see very quickly where to go and how to remediate that. The next stage is called health, which brings in event management from third-party tools like Splunk, SolarWinds, VMware, just to name a few. The Now platform ingests those event notifications and correlates them to the configuration items in your CMDB. That allows you to know at a glance when there is degraded performance, when there are failures, And because we monitor configuration files on those configuration items as well, it allows us to deliver root cause analysis so that single or multiple IT teams can effect faster and more accurate resolutions the first time. The third piece of IT operations management is optimization, and this is related specifically to all of your cloud resources across all of your cloud service providers. So from a single utility, you can create and enforce provisioning rules, blueprints, and governance, as well as see cloud insights into current monthly spending, predicted next monthly spending, and where you can make adjustments on, let's say, compute machine sizes to save money, and also things like orphaned machines that don't have individual or group owners attached. And this is an example of a service map, which goes back to what Reggie mentioned in the beginning, how ServiceNow is a service-aware CMDB. Without understanding the business and mission-critical services that your configuration items are providing, unfortunately, you're left with basically an inventory system. So in this case, these arrows at the top represent what would normally be load balancers, where client traffic starts to come into this application service called order logistics. In the first tier, we can see that the logistics process here is yellow in a cautionary state, so we know we need to investigate its performance. In the second tier, we can also see that the Glassfish web server is in a cautionary state. But truly, the problem relies here in tier 3, where either the Oracle database or the virtual machine that it runs on is in a red critical state, and that's an example of how through service mapping and configuration file monitoring, we can identify root causes more quickly and accurately. So I brought up this slide to demonstrate how CMDB truly is the key to unlocking value across different products on the platform, but specifically for the statement here at the bottom. The CMDB is the single source of truth that enables deeper integration across the entire platform. Well, think about other CMDB and data source products that you have in the environment today, and imagine them bringing them into the ServiceNow platform in a coherent way that allows you to see all pieces of data as they relate to the configuration items that you own and the business and mission services that you're providing. What that means is ServiceNow becomes not the single source of truth, but rather the single source of action, telling you and your operational staff how they can most quickly resolve degradations and failures as they relate to your business and mission critical applications. And this is an example of how the CMDB looks throughout the ServiceNow platform. It starts with finding impacted services and affected CIs with regard to incident, change, and problem management like we're accustomed to seeing in service desk products, but expands into areas like asset management for hardware and software lifecycle, configuration management for compliance and audit requirements, and also security, vulnerability, risk, and configuration compliance, all from a single database. So CMDB enables us to easily capture all technology data, as I said a moment ago, and it looks a bit like this. In the middle, you'll see the ServiceNow Cloud with CMDB, and then the ServiceNow discovery and service mapping processes. In the lower left, we see an example of a customer data center, like on-premises equipment that includes physical, virtual, containers, and also serverless compute and microservices similar to AWS Lambda. In the lower right, all the connections from your public cloud service providers using native API connectivity, which in the case of Amazon and Azure brings in billing and usage data to help you drive reduced spending over time. In the upper right, as I said earlier, you can bring all of your own data to either populate or update CI or CI attributes from sources like spreadsheets, database connections, REST API, OpenID Connect, and other custom sources. In fact, ServiceNow has 100 custom sources that allow you to connect into third-party products. And that all leads us into the concept of how to implement digital transformation across all of your IT services. And if we look at the quote here in the orange box, it says customers are most successful when focused on business value and how to achieve digital transformation for service automation. For those of us in the federal space, that's a fancy way of saying we can create mission success. But first, we have to answer a few questions like, what are the business and mission outcomes that we need to target? And then, what is the priority order we need to do them in? Which data elements are required to help us achieve those outcomes? How do we obtain and maintain them automatically? And then how do we provide governance, which really means how do we prove to auditors and those involved in ATO processes that we're doing things in the right way? Well, I'd like to introduce you to the next generation of ServiceNow CMDB, which is called Service Graph. This will be deployed in the next version of our software called Paris, and will continue to evolve over time as we get input from customers in terms of challenges that they're seeing. Service Graph was designed to more tightly connect dev, operational, and service groups around the operational needs with one data model and one database. And you'll see down below here, we reference the Common Service Data Model for Guidance, or CSDM. And CSDM is a framework to guide you through the building and evolution of a healthy CMDB. It's not a product or service that we sell, but rather just a framework of guiding principles that we provide to you. And later in the presentation, there will be a link to get to the version 2 of the latest white paper. Service Graph is designed for keeping all services connected across all functions in your digital environment, to integrate your planning, architecture, DevOps, traditional data center equipment, and cloud equipment guided by that single framework. In other words, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of optimizing your business and mission critical services. And of course, comprehensiveness. Service Graph was designed to be broader than just simply building and maintaining a CMDB, especially with regard to other products in the market which do not do discovery and service mapping, so they're not what you could call a service-aware platform. Service Graph is designed to enable your organization to move more quickly toward digital transformation. And you'll see in the green here how this really pertains to us in the federal space. In terms of increasing velocity, we're talking about faster provisioning of business and mission services. For improving experience, we want to make sure that we are more efficient in the way we support our back-end staff and the warfighter with regard to our mission. And then reducing risk. We always want to have better control over and faster recovery from non-compliance issues, which really is the key to helping us gain and maintain ATOs. To go further, Service Graph is designed to drive value for the entire digital product catalog throughout the service's lifecycle. So as an example, we want to understand the cost and the user experience involved with products and services that we manage and maintain. And then how do we make those consistent? We also want to understand which customers are impacted when we have an issue or an outage. And then we need to understand root causes and how we prioritize and fix the configuration items that are involved. And then what are all the products and services that are affected by any kind of vulnerability? Speaking of governance, risk, and compliance, we need to understand how to proactively enforce security and risk policies. And so this is an example of how quickly you can look at and understand the health and usability of the configuration management database. This is called the CMDB Health Dashboard. And at a glance, you can see that the overall scorecard is 66%. And it's based on 3 areas: completeness, compliance, and correctness. In the lower left, we have the completeness scorecard, which looks pretty good at 99%. And it is based on the attributes of the configuration items populated around recommended and required attributes. So in that category, we're doing pretty well. In the middle, though, we have CMDB compliance. And compliance is related to key performance indicators, or KPIs, that come out of the box that you can use very quickly and also customize for your audit needs. An example of compliance would be that every server must have 2 gigabytes of memory or more to be compliant for this network. In our case, we have some work to do because only 31% of CIs in the CMDB fall within compliance based upon the standards that we set for this network. Lastly is correctness, which is comprised of 3 metrics where we look at duplicate CIs, orphan CIs, and then staleness of data. So duplicates sound exactly as they are. We're looking for more than one configuration item for something we think should be just one item. And sometimes that happens when we bring in legacy data from other sources. And on the ServiceNow platform, we have a feature called IRE, the Identification and Reconciliation Engine. And its job is to manage and maintain the data sources that are allowed to connect into the CMDB and which attributes they're allowed to update for particular configuration item classes. The orphan metric has to do with machines that have no owners or no group owners as a required CI attribute. And then lastly, staleness. This is related to configuration items that are probably turned off or possibly just disconnected from the network and haven't been able to be updated by the ServiceNow discovery process in a certain period of time, which again goes back to a key performance indicator that comes out of the box or that you customize based upon the requirements of your network. And I wanted to pause for a moment and talk about the discovery process because it's so critical to populating both configuration items and accurate values for their attributes. The first part here, called the scan phase, is simply where we do an agentless scan of your network segments to find out what is on the wire. Servers, switches, routers, firewalls, storage arrays, all the common items that you would find in your networks, including those elements in cloud service provider networks. Once we figure out who's out there on the network and alive, we classify them by configuration item type. For instance, is it a server, a storage array, or a network switch? The next phase is identification, where we determine if it is a server, is it Windows, and if so, what version of the operating system? And lastly, exploration, which is the deepest part, where we say if it is a Windows Server 2016 version, then we populate all of the attribute values, which could be 10, 15, or 50, that we know are either required or recommended for a healthy CMDB. And I wanted to talk through a couple of customer examples from some familiar names you might know. Accenture is one of our large federal partners, and they're also a customer of ServiceNow. They found that they had similar challenges across their IT estate to those that we see in virtually every network. And in the 15 years that I worked in IT operations management roles, this was absolutely what I dealt with. Siloed infrastructure management platforms, where we have more than one team across locations or multiple locations, but we have different pieces of software that maybe aren't connected or never could be. And then disconnected IT service management processes, meaning that not everyone is using the same piece of software, or not everyone is choosing to. And then lastly, too many noisy alerts. When you have event management notification systems like Splunk, SolarWinds, Logarithm, and others, most people are complaining about too many noisy alerts, a large volume of alerts, and an amount of alerts that don't actually tell them anything that they can take action on. Well, with IT operations management, discovery, and event management, you can bring those alerts in as a part of your discovery and service mapping process to reduce the noise through deduplication and correlation in the context of your business services. So an example would be if a storage array goes down, it may affect one or more business service, and it's important to know which those are while the storage team is troubleshooting that outage. And Accenture was no different. And what they found with the ServiceNow CMDB and IT operations management products, they had a 41% reduction in the mean time to recovery when they had service degradations or outages. Through automated workflows as a part of IT operations management, they saw a 90% reduction in the time from event notification to ticket creation. And when we say ticket creation, we mean sending the ticket through an automated workflow to the right team the first time. So if it's a storage array problem, it doesn't go to the network team. And if it's a switch problem, it doesn't go to everybody. Lastly, they saw a 50% improvement in configuration item accuracy, which goes back to the CMDB health dashboard that we looked at a moment ago: completeness, correctness, and compliance. And their managing director, Rich, had this quote, that the ServiceNow platform enabled transparency and control across their services, applications, and infrastructure, which improved critical service reliability and stability. I've only been with ServiceNow for a short period of time, but I certainly wish that I knew all of this and had this type of option 15 years ago. Another customer of ours that had great success is Red Hat. They were driving informed use of IT resources and smarter business decisions with the ServiceNow CMDB. And they're such a large organization with so many segments and so many locations, they realized they needed a single CMDB platform to make all IT infrastructure and data decisions from. They had a goal to increase infrastructure visibility across on-premises and hybrid cloud elements from a single pane of glass, and they knew that they needed one platform for both IT groups and non-IT, such as HR, finance, and facilities. And their CMDB manager quotes here by saying, "We can make smarter decisions on where to deploy apps, whether it's on the physical server, VMs, or in the cloud with containers." And the CMDB with discovery and service mapping is what allows you to make those types of decisions. So let's take another pause here and ask our second question. Of the products you have today, CMDB or other data source type products, what is your confidence level with them in terms of completeness, correctness, and compliance?
Waiting for a few more answers to come in, but looks like we're around majority at not sure, a few more at good, and 2 people at very good.
Congratulations to the very goods. That's where we all want to be, but it's absolutely important to have the right tools to get there. And actually, while we're waiting, I'll point out one thing that we hear from customers quite often, which is that they do have some tools that they're very happy with, but because they weren't designed to integrate with others, they're not entirely sure how they're going to scale over the next 5 years, especially with changing budgets and changing missions for organizations.
Yep, looks like the majority is definitely saying not sure.
Okay, and that's pretty consistent with what we hear from customers. So the good news is, folks, you're not alone, and we can help. So our next section is about best practices for creating a healthy CMDB. And this is related back to the CSDM, the Common Service Data Model, which I mentioned earlier. And believe me, it's a lot simpler than it might look, and we're happy to help you work through it. And so the stages are setting direction, building a team and a governance model, designing the data model, operationalizing or bringing the CMDB online and into practice, and then creating an ongoing strategic alignment. So to begin, direction can start by asking what we're doing. What is it we need to accomplish? And then how would we do that? What is the approach? And what are the constraints and assumptions that we're working with to get there? And lastly, why? What are our business and mission outcomes that we're looking for that a CMDB needs to support? And then most importantly here at the bottom, how do we measure that? How do we prove that we know when we're on track and can demonstrate that we're hitting the milestones that we need to? This shows us an example of a strategic initiative and then how it maps to a CMDB. On the left, it says we need to enable our corporate employees to work seamlessly remotely, certainly timely for what's going on right now, and it's referring to people working across a VPN. In the middle, the use cases we need to satisfy are whether employees have the VPN client on their laptop and whether it's the right version. And then on the back end, do we have the right hardware and software to power the VPN? Is it up to date? And can we prove that it's compliant within security constraints? And then when we're troubleshooting any VPN degraded services or outages, how do we quickly determine root cause? Well, over here on the right, it says we need an accurate and current inventory of hardware and software from end user devices and our entire operational estate. Well, the good news is we don't need to inventory Windows servers when thinking about VPN, but we may need an inventory and an operational understanding of switches, routers, and firewalls. In addition, we need to understand how infrastructure and application components are connected, or you could say interconnected, to support each other and the business and mission critical applications. So the next step is to build our team and our governance model. That begins with a CMDB steering committee, including IT leaders who have an understanding and decision-making responsibility and accountability for our business and mission apps. We need to articulate how the CMDB will support those strategic initiatives so that executives and leaders understand very clearly the who, what, when, where, why parts of the story. Most importantly, having that executive and stakeholder buy-in is important to give us credibility and create an environment of trust around the initiative so that our team can be supported to drive the change that we're looking for. Without that executive buy-in, a CMDB initiative, or frankly any initiative, won't have the ongoing support that it needs. And in a case like this, we're probably talking about some cultural shift with regard to IT operations staff. We can't afford to have a low adoption rate because that won't allow us to hit our targeted objectives. Step 3 is where we actually do the CMDB data model design using the CSDM framework, which again is simply a guideline that we've created to help you in this journey both today and then as your CMDB needs mature in the future. And you can start simply and gradually, which means quickly, using out-of-the-box configuration items. Because we've been doing this for so long, we know what's out there and we know what all the attributes are, so it's very simple for you to get started. And then in the middle, it says data model efforts should be limited. Well, Perhaps you start with a phased approach where 1 week we do servers, the next week we do workstations, after that perhaps storage arrays, and then moving on into network equipment. We have to know which configuration item classes are within the scope as it relates to our business and mission objectives, and that way we aren't busy with scanning and classifying things that we don't need as it pertains to the project in this phase. We also want to understand attributes and relationships that are needed to fulfill the use cases that we outlined. And then lastly, we want to configure our discovery efforts to make sure that we get that data, not all data. And the CSDM model answers some essential questions for us. It defines the tables and the structure provided for this type of effort out of the box. These things can be customized, but typically speaking, they don't need to be. It also provides examples and use cases for how to integrate across all of the ServiceNow products. And again, the CSDM is a common framework of procedures for the ServiceNow product catalog, and then also how customers need to work and how partners integrate with everything to help you achieve your CMDB goals. And when we talk about implementing a digital transformation strategy, it's important to think about not wrapping new technology solutions around existing processes, but rather to either replace them or merge the two together to get the best results for what our organizations need. Again, gaining executive and stakeholder support from the beginning is necessary to drive the cultural changes that are probably required to get something like this done. And then lastly, identifying the following issues using CSDM as our reference. For instance, key configuration items to build a phased approach for the objectives we're trying to reach, required CI references, key data sources, data health dashboards, as we saw earlier, and then key performance indicators, or KPIs, to measure the value and the progress as we progress toward our business goals. And I mentioned earlier, we have a CSDM white paper that we publish, and that will be included in the slide presentation that is sent to you after this. The fourth step is operationalizing, or rather putting the CMDB into production. And that allows us to avoid duplicate CIs or misclassified or unclassified orphans, and of course incomplete configuration items that don't actually help us drive service maps and the value for business and mission apps. There's a study quoted here where they say, when people perform work from information that is not clear, concise, and valid, organizations are spending 40% of their resources on corrective actions. I can testify that 15 years of my career was spent doing that, which means about 3.2 hours a day of doing the wrong things and still not getting the right results. But by following the CSDM framework, we have the ability to gain visibility across our entire IT estate by discovering all infrastructure and application elements, discovering services and building service maps, and then building the dashboard to show us correctness, compliance, and health. And I wanted to go back for just a moment and show you a little more clear example of service mapping that we've been talking about. The first phase is here on the left, where we do what is called horizontal discovery. That's simply just looking for what devices are powered up on the wire and then classifying them by configuration item type. For instance, load balancer, app server, virtual machines, and physical hosts. The next stage is where we put those into a dependency map based upon the ports and protocols that they're using and who they're connected to. And lastly, we create the service map, which is also called top-down discovery because it illustrates which load balancer is connected to which group of web servers, and then app servers, databases, virtual machines, and physical hosts. Having that information gives you much more power than with traditional CMDB type products that are not service aware and act much more like simple inventory gathering tools. Lastly, step 5, we need to create ongoing strategic alignment. In the slide, we have a bunch of terms that you see in commercial businesses, but I've added those in green to represent what we see across federal agencies with military leaders and senior GS advisors that guide and sometimes approve our projects. So effective two-way communication is common with business and mission stakeholders, and as we said, critical so that we can understand and drive the needs of the organization, and then also how to plan for and support those needs as they change. And that turns the CMDB into a high-value asset for your business and mission apps and services, starting today and growing into the future as your needs change. And that leads us to our last poll question, which is really more of a statement. A healthy CMDB is required to achieve our business and mission goals. The question really is, how do you feel? Not sure, probably, or the sooner the better.
Looks like right off the bat, we have sooner the better coming in as the top pick. Some people are saying probably though.
And I absolutely agree with that. Not only is CMDB and service mapping and discovery a complicated topic, but what we have found with customers is that to be able to break it down into a crawl, walk, run process, phased approaches that are small bite-sized pieces, makes it a whole lot easier. And so for the folks that said probably, I hope that you'll reach out to us with questions today so that we can try to answer those for you. That is all I have for today. Brooke, I will send it back to you unless, Reggie, you have some additional examples that you might be able to share for customer successes.
Hi, John. No, I am basically ready to close, and I'll transition to Brooke if there are any questions or comments that we can address at this time.
Yeah, I think we should
state that.
We do have some questions rolling in.
Okay. I would just state really quickly to the audience that hopefully we were able to explain this in detail enough for the audience to resonate with the value that a configuration management database is a great opportunity to capture every detail of your IT organization and have it at your fingertips for situational awareness.
Absolutely, Reggie, and great point. One of the questions that came in is, could you talk more about Service Graph and how it relates to CSDB, or does it extend to CSDM, or is it built off of? I know that you guys talked through that a little bit with the Service Graph, but not what it is, so to say.
Yes, and thank you. I appreciate that. Service Graph is a little bit confusing because if you're not in the DevOps world or the service provisioning world, it seems like some extra stuff. So the concept of Service Graph, again, is literally just the next generation of CMDB that brings in more data from dev environments and more data from service environments over time, meaning that in the next release of ServiceNow, which is called Paris, you'll see more improvements that are related to that as we get input from customers in DevOps and SecOps and customer service spaces that are asking for different types of functionality. So as it was explained to us, Service Graph is related to advanced functionality that some, not all, will need to use. And the common service data model, which is the 5 pieces that we just talked through today, are what will help you walk through that more easily and comprehensively, in addition to the CSDM white paper that we're going to publish the link to because it's much more detailed than what we could go through today.
Perfect, thank you. And there are two questions that came in while you were going through the product, and one was, what would the frequency of CI search? I'm not sure where that falls into place, but if you guys would like to answer that.
Oh, yes.
And then
Absolutely.
the follow-up to that was, is it live or defined frequency?
I think I understand the question. It sounds like this is related to what we call discovery, which is a part of our IT operations management product. And discovery is a process where we have a small Java-based server that runs in the network, or rather on every segment of the network that it would need to. And it reaches out to all the devices on your network in an agentless configuration. It uses the native protocols that each of the devices talk with. So for instance, in Windows, we're talking WMI, switch route firewall, we're talking SNMP, storage arrays might use CIM, and it scans those devices on an interval that you decide on. I think the default is every 7 days, and it can also be broken down to scan on different intervals based upon the CI type. So if you had an organization that was in flux, let's say you were doing a network switch upgrade, you may want to configure discovery for network switches to happen every day, or possibly even more often, to make sure that you're capturing new devices and also learning about old devices that have been retired so that they don't end up affecting your score as stale data. I hope that was correct.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, I got a comment that looked like that was what they were looking for, so I appreciate that answer. Next one coming in, how about transforming traditional CMDB with physical servers to cloud servers?
I'm not quite understanding that, but if what you mean by transform is like a refactoring, or rather just a simple lift and shift, where an on-premises hardware server gets moved into a cloud service provider to become just a virtual machine, that would be a case where we would discover the new device in the cloud environment based upon its unique identifiers. And the hardware-based server, which has unique identifiers like, let's say, serial number on the chassis or a UUID number for the processor, those would eventually go stale once they've been turned off. But if you knew that they had been turned off and transitioned to a cloud-based element, you could then go into the CMDB inventory and simply edit it out. It's entirely up to you.
Perfect, thank you. And looks like that was what they were asking. So I have one more question for you guys that says, could you speak to the benefits of discovery over an integration to an existing data source? I understand that the Now platform enables both, but when do you choose one over the other?
That is a perfect question. Let me go back to one slide that I think will help us talk through this. So as I said on a couple of occasions, the Now platform should be thought of as a source of action, because if you think about managing data sources across different elements in an organization beyond IT, let's think of HR or self-service catalogs for people that might be ordering equipment on their own, then you want to be able to populate the CMDB with all the correct data that is required, which very likely could come from existing legacy systems. So in the upper right of the diagram here, we have bring your own data. And as I said, we have 100 certified CMDB integrations that simply just work. That includes things like spreadsheets, JDBC database connections, REST API connections, OpenID Connect, and then some custom ones. And the question about when and how to use things is, in my understanding, as simple as often as you need. So let's say you have a legacy system, you could configure an import set from that database, bring the data in, review that data, ensure that it is as accurate as it should be, and then not use it again. Because the presumption is that if you're not using the legacy system any longer, you wouldn't need to do follow-on migrations from it to the Now platform. But if it was going to be a phased approach where the legacy system is continuing to be used for a period of time, I'd have to ask an architect about that, but there is a way to determine when and for how long you connect to third-party data sets and how you use the data when it's imported.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great question and an awesome answer. Thank you. Looks like that's kind of all the questions we have for today. We'll make sure we follow up with people offline for some of the more specifics, and hopefully we can set demos and other demonstrations for you guys in order to help get a better idea of this system as well. So I want to thank all of our participants as well as our speakers for being with us today. I really appreciate it. We do have a few quick polling questions that I'll pull over in just a minute for you guys to answer. Also, we do have our contact information on the screen here. This is Evan. He is with our ServiceNow team here at Caresoft. Please reach out if you have any other questions or you'd like to request more information. Here we have the polling slides for you all. And please let me know if there's anything else we can do for you guys today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.